The stars stretched into long white lines as the Endeavour dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair and watched the view screen return to normal space. 3 months into their mission, and this was their 8th jump beyond the solar system, nobody from Earth had ever come this far before. Dr. Lisa Hamilton looked up from her science station with wide eyes. She was the chief science officer and the best mind Jake had ever worked with. Her fingers moved across the holographic display as she studied the readings that filled her screen. Something had caught her attention, and Jake could tell it was important. Brandon Cole stood at the tactical station with his arms crossed over his chest. He was their security officer, and he trusted his instincts more than any sensor reading. Right now, those instincts were telling him something was wrong. The dead star system ahead of them showed energy. Signatures that should not exist in a place where everything had died millions of years ago. Nina Vasquez sat at communications, and her job was to listen to everything the universe had to say. Most of the time she heard nothing but the background radiation of empty space. Today was different. She was picking up patterns in the energy readings, and patterns meant intelligence. Patterns meant someone had built something out here in the darkness between stars. Jake stood up from his chair and walked over to Lisa's station. The display showed a massive structure orbiting the dead star at the center of the system. It was bigger than anything humanity had ever constructed. The station was at least 50 kilometers across, and it was still generating power after. Who knew how many years of abandonment? They approached slowly because nobody wanted to trigger some ancient defense system. Brandon kept his hand near the weapons controls, even though their small exploration ship would be useless against technology that could build something this enormous. Nina tried every communication frequency humans knew about, but received only silence in return. The station grew larger on the view screen as they got closer. Its surface was covered in symbols and designs that hurt to look at for too long. The architecture was wrong in ways that made human eyes struggle to understand what they were seeing. This was built by minds that thought differently than humans did. Jake made the decision to dock with the station. They had come too far to turn back now, and Earth needed to know what was out here. The Endeavour connected to an airlock that still functioned perfectly despite its age. Whatever civilization built this place had made things to last. The 4 of them suited up and entered the station together. Brandon went first with his weapon ready. Jake followed with Lisa right behind him. Nina came last, carrying recording equipment to document everything they found. The airlock cycled open and they stepped into a corridor that stretched away into darkness. Their lights revealed walls covered in more of those strange symbols. Lisa was already trying to make sense of them with her portable computer. The station had gravity, which meant its power systems were still running. The air was breathable according to their suits, but nobody was. Taking off their helmets in this place, they walked for what felt like hours, through corridors and chambers that seemed designed for beings much larger than humans. Some rooms were filled with equipment they could not identify. Other rooms were empty, except for more of those symbols covering every surface. Nina recorded everything, while Brandon checked every corner for threats that never appeared. Then they found the central chamber. It was a massive sphere with a platform in the middle, surrounded by floating displays. The displays activated as they approached and filled the air with images and data. Lisa gasped as her computer began translating some of the symbols. The station's systems recognized them as intelligent beings and was trying to communicate. The images showed stars and planets. They showed ships traveling between worlds. They showed cities on dozens of different planets. This was a map of civilizations that existed across the galaxy. Lisa's hands shook as she worked to understand what the station was telling them. Then the images changed. They showed Earth. The station had records of Earth going back hundreds of thousands of years. Images of early humans hunting on the plains of Africa. Images of the first cities being built in Mesopotamia. Images of the Industrial Revolution and the Space Age. Someone had been watching humanity for all of recorded history and long before. Jake felt cold as he realized what this meant. Humanity had never been alone. Someone out there had been observing Earth since before civilization began. The question was why they had stayed hidden and what they wanted. Lisa found files that her computer could partially translate. The symbols spelled out a name for whoever built this station. They called themselves the Architects. The data showed they were part of something bigger called the Eternal Council. 12 ancient species that had existed for millions of years working together. To maintain order across the galaxy, Nina discovered communication logs that were more recent. The Architects had been sending messages about Earth for the past 200 years. The messages used words that her computer translated as warning and threat assessment and containment protocols. Whatever the Architects thought about humanity, it was not friendly. Brandon found the military data. The station had defensive capabilities that could destroy planets. It had weapons humans could not even understand the purpose of. And all of this technology was millions of years more advanced than anything Earth had created. If these Architects decided humanity was a threat, then humanity would not survive the encounter. Lisa worked through the night while the others rested. She was driven to understand what the Architects feared about humanity. The data showed comparisons between human development and the development of other species. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Every other species in the galaxy had taken millions of years to reach space. Humanity had done it in a few thousand years. The Architects had held an emergency meeting about what they called the human problem. Their debates had lasted decades by human standards. Some argued for making contact and guiding humanity's development. Others argued for more extreme solutions. The most recent recommendation made Lisa's blood run cold. She called the others back to the central chamber. Jake read the translated text on her screen and felt his stomach drop. The recommendation was clear and direct. Humanity posed an existential threat to galactic order. The Architects recommended immediate containment or elimination of the species before it could spread beyond its home system. Jake looked at his crew. They had come out here looking for signs of alien life. They had found something far worse. They had found proof that humanity was not welcome in the galaxy. They had found evidence that the ancient civilizations out there saw humans as something to be feared and controlled or destroyed. Nina asked the question they were all thinking. What do they do now? Jake stared at the data showing Earth surrounded by warning markers in the Architect database. Humanity had no idea they were being watched. They had no idea that their rapid technological progress had marked them as dangerous in the eyes of beings who had ruled the galaxy since before humans existed. The answer was simple, even if the consequences were terrifying. They had to warn Earth. They had to let humanity know that the galaxy was not empty, and the things living out here did not want humans spreading to the stars. They had to prepare for the possibility that humanity's first contact with alien life would not be peaceful. Jake gave the order to copy everything they could from the station's database. They would bring this information back to Earth and let the people there decide what to do. The Endeavor detached from the ancient station and turned back toward home. Behind them, the station continued its silent watch over the dead star system. None of them spoke during the journey back. They were too busy thinking about what they had discovered. Humanity had dreamed of finding alien civilizations for centuries. Now they knew the truth. The aliens had found humanity first, and they were afraid of what humans might become. The Endeavor arrived back at Earth 3 weeks after leaving the Architect station. Jake Morrison transmitted everything they had found to Planetary Command before they even entered orbit. By the time they landed, the entire world knew that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that the beings out there saw humans as a problem to be solved. President Helen Carter sat in the emergency council chamber surrounded by the leaders of every major nation on Earth. The room was silent as they watched the footage from the Architect station. Nobody spoke as the translated warnings played across the screens. The words containment and elimination kept appearing in the reports, and everyone understood what those words meant. Dr. Marcus Webb stood at the front of the room with his presentation ready. He was the leading expert on evolution and biology, and the president had asked him to explain why the Architects feared humanity so much. His hands were steady as he brought up the comparison. Data that Lisa Hamilton had recovered from the station. The first slide showed the development timeline of a species called the Vast Ones. They had taken 8 million years to discover fire. Another 12 million years to develop agriculture. 30 million years total to reach space travel. Marcus let those numbers sink in before showing the next slide. The second slide showed another species called the Eternal S. Wimmers, their timeline was similar. Millions upon millions of years for each major breakthrough. Every species in the Architect database showed the same pattern. Slow, steady progress over time frames that made human history look like a single heartbeat. Then Marcus showed Earth's timeline. Fire discovered and mastered in less than 1 million years. Agriculture developed 10,000 years ago. Space travel achieved in the last century. The entire span of human technological civilization fit into a period, so short that the ancient species barely noticed it passing. The room erupted in conversation. Defense Minister Kevin Ross stood up and demanded to know what this meant for Earth's security. Marcus held up his hand and waited for silence. The answer to that question was what everyone needed to understand. He explained that the architects were not wrong to be concerned. Humanity was developing at a rate that was unprecedented in galactic history. If humans continued at this pace, they would match architect technology within a few centuries. They would surpass it within a millennium. Two beings who thought in terms of millions of years. This was like watching a wildfire spread across a forest. Dr. Claire Mendoza took over the presentation next. She had spent the past 3 weeks studying the biological data recovered from the Architect station. What she had found explained everything about why the ancient species feared humanity. She brought up images of Architect brain structures on the main screen. The Architect brain was stable and unchanging. Their neural pathways formed early in life and remained almost identical until death. They thought the same way their ancestors had thought 1 million years ago. Change happened so slowly in their biology that they could barely perceive it happening at all, Claire showed. Human brain scans next. The contrast was startling. Human brains were constantly forming new connections and breaking old ones. Neural plasticity allowed humans to adapt to new situations within days or weeks. What took the architects millions of years to evolve, humans could learn and adapt to in a single generation. She explained that this was not a flaw in human biology, but a feature that had evolved specifically because Earth was a chaotic and dangerous place. Humans had survived ice ages and volcanic winters and climate shifts that would have destroyed less adaptable species. The price of that adaptability was that humans changed fast, and the architects did not know how to deal with species that changed fast. The president asked the question that everyone was thinking. What happens now? Kevin Ross had an answer ready. His people had been monitoring deep space sensors since the Endeavour returned. What they found was not encouraging. Multiple unknown vessels had entered human space over the past 2 weeks. They were not approaching Earth directly, but they were positioning themselves in a pattern that suggested they were preparing for something. Kevin brought up a tactical display showing the positions of 16 confirmed alien vessels and possibly dozens more that were staying hidden. The ships were not attacking, but they were not leaving either. They were watching and waiting. Kevin believed they were an observation force sent by the Eternal Council to assess humanity's response to the discovery of the Architect station. What humanity did next would determine whether those ships stayed peaceful or turned hostile. President Carter ordered a global address to be prepared. The people of Earth deserved to know what was happening. But before she could speak to the world, a message arrived from space. Nina Vasquez was the first to receive it at the Planetary Communications Center. The message was in a language that human computers could barely translate. It identified the sender as Ambassador Vorthik, speaking on behalf of the architects and the Eternal Council. The message requested a formal diplomatic channel be opened between Earth and the Council. It sounded polite and reasonable until the final paragraph. Vorthik stated that humanity had reached a critical point in its development. The Council had debated the human situation for many years and had reached a decision. Humanity would be offered a choice: accept guided development under Council, supervision, or face corrective intervention to protect galactic stability. The translated message included details of what guided development meant. Earth would surrender all faster-than-light technology and the blueprints to build more. Council monitors would be stationed on Earth to oversee human scientific research. Any technology deemed dangerous would be prohibited. Human population growth would be limited to levels the Council considered sustainable. Humanity would be allowed to exist, but only under strict control. The alternative was described in cold clinical language. Corrective intervention meant the Council would use whatever force necessary to contain humanity within the solar system. If humanity resisted, they would face military action from civilizations that had millions of years of experience in warfare. The message ended with a deadline. Humanity had 30 days to decide. Accept guidance and survive as a controlled species, or refuse and face the consequences. President Carter read the message 3 times before she believed what she was seeing. The ancient aliens were giving humanity a choice between slavery and war. She looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. Some looked angry. Some looked afraid. All of them looked to her for guidance. She asked Marcus Webb if there was any chance the Council was bluffing. Marcus shook his head. The architects did not bluff. They had maintained galactic order for 50 million years. They would not make threats they were not prepared to carry out. Claire Mendoza offered a different perspective. She pointed out that the Council was afraid. Beings who were truly confident in their power did not need to threaten. They simply acted. The fact that the architects were offering humanity a choice meant they were uncertain about what would happen if they tried to force the issue. Kevin Ross agreed with Claire's assessment. He believed the Council feared that trying to contain humanity by force might fail. Humans were unpredictable and they adapted quickly to threats. The architects wanted humanity to submit peacefully because a war would be costly even if the Council eventually won. Jake Morrison spoke up from his seat near the back of the room. He had been quiet during most of the meeting, but now he had something to say. He reminded everyone that the Endeavor had found evidence of other ancient civilizations in the Architect database, species that had existed before the current Council and had vanished completely. Lisa Hamilton expanded on Jake's point. She had studied those extinct civilizations carefully. Each one had achieved incredible technological heights before disappearing. Each one had stopped evolving. They reached a plateau of development and stayed there. For millions of years, believing they had achieved perfection, then catastrophe struck. Asteroid impacts or gamma-ray bursts or environmental collapse. Events that required rapid adaptation to survive. The extinct species could not adapt fast enough because they had lost the ability to change. They went extinct because they had become too stable and too rigid. Lisa suggested that the Eternal Council might be making the same mistake. They had achieved stability across the galaxy, but at the cost of evolutionary stagnation. They saw change as a threat because they had forgotten how to change themselves. Humanity represented everything they feared. Chaos and unpredictability and rapid transformation. The president listened to all the arguments and then made her decision. She would address the world tomorrow and present the Council's ultimatum. The people of Earth would decide their own fate. This was too important a choice to be made by leaders alone. She dismissed the Council and walked to the window overlooking the city below. Somewhere up in the darkness beyond the sky, ancient beings were watching Earth and waiting for humanity's answer. They had given humans 30 days to choose between freedom and safety. Helen Carter knew which choice she would make. She only hoped the rest of humanity would have the courage to make the same one. The next month would determine whether humans remained masters of their own destiny or became subjects in someone else's empire. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. President Helen Carter stood before the cameras and told the world. She explained about the Architect Station and the ancient civilizations that had been watching Earth for hundreds of thousands of years. She described the Eternal Council and their demand that humanity submit to guided development. She laid out the choice in simple terms that everyone could understand. The world erupted in debate within hours of her speech. Some governments immediately called for acceptance of the Council's terms. Prime Minister Graham of the European Federation argued that survival was more important than pride. He pointed out that humanity could not win a war against beings who had mastered space travel before humans even existed. Senator Greg Palmer stood in the American Congress and gave a very different speech. He said that freedom was worth fighting for even against impossible odds. He reminded everyone that humans had faced extinction many times before and had survived by refusing to surrender. The ancient aliens were offering a cage and calling it safety. The arguments raged in every city, in every home across Earth. Families divided over the choice. Some people packed emergency supplies and prepared for war. Others began learning what they could about the Eternal Council, hoping to find a way to coexist peacefully. The 30-day deadline hung over everything like a storm cloud. Jake Morrison did not wait for Earth to make its decision. He volunteered to return to the Architect Station with a small team. If there was any information that might help humanity, then it would be found in that ancient database. President Carter approved the mission immediately. Lisa Hamilton joined him without hesitation. She had been studying the Architect data nonstop since returning to Earth and believed there was more to discover. A young engineer named Troy Bennett volunteered for the mission. Because he wanted to understand how the ancient technology worked, Dr. Amy Chen joined as their linguistics expert to help translate anything they found. The four of them took a faster ship this time. The journey that had taken weeks before now took only days. The Architect Station was exactly as they had left it, floating silently in orbit around the dead star. They docked and entered through the same airlock as before. This time they went deeper into the station, past the central chamber and down corridors that seemed to go on forever. Troy mapped everything as they walked so they would not get lost in the massive structure. Amy recorded every symbol they passed, hoping to improve the translation software. They found chambers filled with equipment that still functioned after millions of years. Troy was amazed by the engineering. The power systems were so efficient that they barely registered as using energy at all. The materials did not degrade or wear down over time. Everything was built to last forever. Lisa found what she was looking for in a chamber deep below the main levels. It was an archive room filled with data storage devices that her equipment could interface with. She began downloading everything while the others explored nearby rooms. What she discovered changed everything they thought they knew about galactic history. The Architects were not the first ancient civilization. They had found the remnants of others who came before them, species that had risen to incredible heights before vanishing completely from the galaxy. The records showed at least 7 previous galactic civilizations. Each one had achieved mastery over their environment and spread across thousands of star systems. Each one had maintained stability for millions of years. And each one had eventually gone extinct. Lisa called the others to see what she had found. The records included detailed analysis of why each ancient civilization had failed. The extinct species had all followed the same pattern. They evolved quickly at first, then slowed down as they achieved technological maturity. Eventually, they stopped changing altogether. Amy worked on translating the warnings left behind by these dead civilizations. The messages were remarkably similar. They all cautioned against the danger of rapid change and praised the virtue of stability. They described chaos as the enemy of civilization and evolution as something to be controlled and guided. Troy noticed something the others had missed. He pointed out that every extinct civilization had made the same mistake. They believed they had reached perfection. They thought they had discovered the best way to organize society and the best technology to use. So they stopped innovating and stopped adapting. Then disaster struck. Sometimes it was environmental. A star-going supernova or a gamma-ray burst sterilizing their core worlds. Sometimes it was biological. A plague that their static medical technology could not cure. Sometimes it was simply resources running out in ways they had not predicted. The extinct civilizations could not adapt to these catastrophes because they had spent millions of years not adapting. They had built societies designed for stability in a universe that was fundamentally chaotic. When change was forced upon them, they collapsed. Lisa found simulation data that the Architects had run about humanity. They had tried to model what would happen if humans were left alone to develop freely. The simulations showed dozens of possible futures. In some, humans destroyed themselves. In others, they spread across the galaxy peacefully. In still others, they became something the Architects could not even predict. What terrified the Architects was that they could not determine which future was most likely. Human development was too chaotic and too fast for their models to handle. Every simulation ended with uncertainty. The architects had spent millions of years trying to eliminate uncertainty from the galaxy, and humanity represented pure, unpredictable change. Troy discovered military simulations in another data cache. The architects had run scenarios about what would happen if they tried to contain humanity by force. The results were not as one-sided as everyone assumed. Yes, the architects had superior technology, but humans adapted quickly to threats. The simulations showed that even if the architects destroyed Earth, they could not be sure they had eliminated all humans. Colony ships might escape. Hidden bases might survive. And those survivors would spend generations developing weapons and tactics, specifically designed to fight the architects. Jake studied the military data carefully. The simulations showed that a war with humanity would be costly for the architects, even if they won. Humans would not fight like the other species in the galaxy. They would not line up their ships and engage in formal battles. They would use guerrilla tactics and suicide attacks and anything else that worked. Amy found the most important information in a series of council meeting records. Not all the ancient species agreed with the architects about what to do with humanity. Several species argued that the galaxy had become stagnant under council rule. They pointed out that no major innovation had occurred in millions of years. These dissenting species believed humanity might be exactly what the galaxy needed: a catalyst for change. A force that would push all the ancient civilizations to start evolving again. They were outvoted by the majority who feared change, but they had not given up arguing. Lisa compiled everything into a report that they transmitted back to Earth. The message was clear. The architects feared humanity not because humans were dangerous, but because they represented change itself. And change was the one thing the ancient aliens could not control or predict. Back on Earth, Marcus Webb received the data and immediately understood its significance. He called an emergency meeting with President Carter and the Defense Council. What Jake's team had discovered gave humanity a chance. Marcus explained his conclusion. The architects had run simulations showing that eliminating humanity completely was nearly impossible. Even if they destroyed Earth, some humans would survive and spread. The only way to be completely certain would be genocide on a scale that even the ancient aliens found morally unacceptable. Kevin. Ross saw the strategic implications immediately. Humanity did not need to win a war against the Eternal Council. They only needed to prove that containing humanity was impossible. If humans could scatter across the galaxy fast enough, then the architects would face an endless game of hunting down human colonies. Claire. Mendoza added another important point. Every human colony that survived would adapt to its environment. Within a few generations, there would be dozens of variant human species, each evolving in different directions. The architects would not be fighting one species but many. President Carter listened to all the arguments and then asked the critical question. How much time did humanity need to scatter beyond the Council's ability to track them? Kevin estimated they would need at least 6 months to build enough colony ships and send them in enough different directions. The problem was that humanity only had 9 days left before the deadline expired. 9 days to prepare for either war or surrender. 9 days to build the ships that would carry humanity's future into the darkness between stars. Jake. Morrison sent one final message from the Architect Station. He had found evidence that some species in the Eternal Council were looking for an excuse to oppose the architects. If humanity could demonstrate that forced containment was impossible, then those dissenting voices might grow stronger. The question was whether humanity had the courage to gamble everything on that possibility. To reject the Council's ultimatum and bet that their rapid evolution and adaptability would be enough to ensure survival. It was the biggest choice humanity had ever faced, and there was no way to know if it was the right one until it was too late to change course. The global vote was scheduled for the final day before the deadline expired. Every person on Earth above the age of 16 would participate. The question was simple and terrible. Accept the Eternal Council's terms and survive as a controlled species, or reject them and face whatever consequences came. President Carter spent the days before the vote traveling to every continent. She spoke to crowds in New York and Beijing and Mumbai and Lagos. She did not tell people how to vote. She only reminded them what was at stake: freedom or safety, the right to choose their own future, or the certainty of survival under alien supervision. Senator Greg Palmer organized rallies in support of rejection. He stood before millions and declared that humanity had not climbed out of caves and crossed oceans and reached for the stars just to surrender when the universe proved dangerous. He said that every generation faced a choice between comfort and courage, and this generation's choice would define humanity forever. Prime Minister Graham countered with his own speeches. He showed projections of what war with the Eternal Council would cost: billions of lives lost, Earth itself possibly destroyed. He argued that accepting guidance was not surrender but wisdom. Humanity could survive and grow under Council supervision and perhaps one day earn true independence. The debate raged in every language across every communication network. Families argued over dinner tables. Friends stopped speaking to each other over their opposing views. The choice was tearing humanity apart even before the vote happened. Meanwhile, Kevin Ross was preparing for the possibility of rejection. He had commandeered every shipyard on Earth and in orbit. Construction crews worked around the clock building colony ships. Each vessel was designed to carry 5,000 people in cryogenic sleep, along with everything needed to start a new civilization. The ships were not elegant or comfortable. They were built for function, not appearance. Each one carried manufacturing equipment and genetic databases and seeds from every crop humans had ever grown. They carried weapons, too, because nobody knew what they might find in the unexplored regions of space. Colonel Victoria Hayes was in charge of selecting the colonists. She needed volunteers who understood they might never see Earth again. She needed people willing to sleep for decades or centuries while their ships traveled to distant stars. She needed the kind of courage that was hard to find even in desperate times. Thousands volunteered within the first day. Young couples who wanted their children born free, scientists who dreamed of studying alien worlds, soldiers who preferred to fight in the darkness between stars than watch Earth burn. Victoria interviewed them all and tried to choose the ones most likely to survive whatever came. Jake Morrison returned to Earth with his team for days before the vote. He went directly to a meeting with President Carter and the Defense Council. Lisa Hamilton presented their findings from the Architects Station, the ancient civilizations that had gone extinct. The simulations showing humanity could not be completely eliminated. The evidence that some council species disagreed with the architects. Marcus Webb synthesized all the information into a simple conclusion: humanity's rapid evolution was not a flaw, but the key to survival. While the architects spent millions of years making careful decisions, humanity could adapt and change within generations. Speed was humanity's weapon against beings who had forgotten how to hurry. President Carter asked the question that mattered most. If humanity rejected the ultimatum, what would happen in the hours and days that followed? Kevin Ross had wargamed every scenario he could imagine. His answer was not encouraging. The Eternal Council would likely strike at Earth's orbital infrastructure first, destroy the shipyards and space stations to prevent humanity from escaping the solar system. Then they would demand surrender, with Earth itself held hostage. If humanity still refused, they would demonstrate their power by destroying a city or a military base. Victoria Hayes had a different assessment. She believed the Council would be more cautious. They knew from their own simulations that humans were unpredictable. They would try to contain rather than destroy. That caution would give humanity a window of opportunity to act. The plan she proposed was desperate, but possible. When the deadline expired and Earth's answer was transmitted, the colony ships would launch immediately. Not toward nearby stars, but in every direction at maximum speed. The Council could not intercept all of them because they would not know which ships were real colony vessels and which were decoys. Brandon Cole was put in charge of Earth's defense fleet. He had 73 ships, and the Council likely had thousands. His job was not to win battles, but to buy time. Every minute he could delay the Council forces was another minute for colony ships to get farther from Earth. Troy Bennett worked with engineering teams to give the colony ships every advantage possible. He implemented designs based on what he had learned from the Architects Station. The ships could not match ancient alien technology, but they incorporated principles that made them. harder to track, and faster than any human vessel before. Amy Chen prepared data packages that every colony ship would carry. Complete records of human history and culture and scientific knowledge. If Earth fell, the colonies would at least know where they came from and what they were meant to preserve. The day of the vote arrived. Polling stations opened at dawn in each time zone and remained open for 12 hours. The turnout was overwhelming. People who had never voted before stood in line for hours to make their choice. This was too important to leave to someone else. President Carter voted at a small polling station near the Capitol. Reporters asked her which way she voted, and she refused to answer. This was not about what leaders wanted, but about what the people chose. She returned to her office to wait for the results like everyone else. The counting took hours. Vote totals were transmitted from every nation and collected in a secure database. Security was absolute because nobody wanted accusations that the vote had been manipulated. This choice had to be legitimate, or it would tear humanity apart. Jake Morrison waited with Lisa Hamilton and the rest of his crew. They had done everything they could to give humanity the information needed to choose wisely. Now the decision was out of their hands. Lisa held his hand without speaking. There was nothing left to say. Kevin Ross stood in the command center, surrounded by tactical displays. His fleet was ready to launch on his order. The colony ships were loaded and prepared. Thousands of volunteers were already in cryosleep aboard vessels waiting in high orbit. Everything was ready for war. Victoria Hayes stood on the bridge of the lead colony ship. She would command the evacuation if it came to that. Her responsibility was to ensure that humanity survived no matter what happened to Earth. It was a burden that weighed on her, but she accepted it willingly. The results came in as the sun set over the Capitol. President Carter received them first and sat in silence reading the numbers. The vote was not unanimous, but it was clear. 72% of humanity had chosen rejection. Nearly 3/4 of the human race had decided that freedom was worth the risk. She authorized the result to be broadcast immediately. Every screen on Earth showed the same message. Humanity had voted. The answer to the Eternal Council was no. Earth would not accept guided development. Humans would not surrender their right to determine their own future. The message was transmitted into space on every frequency. Ambassador Vorthik would receive it within minutes. The Eternal Council would know that humanity had chosen defiance over safety. What happened next would determine whether that choice led to survival or extinction. President Carter addressed the world one final time before the deadline expired. She said that humanity had made its choice with eyes open and courage strong. She acknowledged that hard times were coming, but expressed faith that humans would face them together. She ended with a simple statement that echoed across Earth. Humanity had been born on a dangerous planet that forced constant adaptation. They had survived ice ages and predators and countless other threats by refusing to give up. The Eternal Council was just another challenge to overcome. Humans would scatter across the stars and become whatever they needed to become to survive. Change was not humanity's weakness, but its greatest strength. The deadline expired. Earth's rejection was official. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the sky, ancient beings were receiving humanity's answer and preparing their response. The age of humanity's isolation was over. What came next would test everything humans believed about themselves. Victoria Hayes gave the order. The colony ships launched. 70 vessels carrying humanity's future accelerated away from Earth in 70 different directions. Behind them, the defense fleet formed up around Earth, ready to buy time with their lives, if necessary. Jake Morrison watched the ships disappear into the night sky. Somewhere aboard those vessels were the seeds of dozens of future human civilizations. Each one would adapt to its new home and evolve in unpredictable ways. The architects feared human adaptability, but they were about to discover they had no choice but to deal with it. The first response from the Council came 6 hours later. It was not weapons fire, but a message. Ambassador Vorthik's transmission was brief and cold. Earth had made an unfortunate choice. The consequences would be humanity's responsibility. But then the message said something unexpected. The Council fleet would not attack immediately. There would be one final opportunity for dialogue. President Carter did not know if this was genuine or a trick, but she responded immediately. Earth would talk, but would not surrender. Humanity's terms were simple. Leave them alone to develop freely, or accept that trying to contain them would fail. Ambassador. Vorthic's second message arrived 12 hours after the first. The tone was different this time. Less threatening and more uncertain. The Eternal Council had convened an emergency session to discuss humanity's rejection. The debate among the ancient species had grown heated in ways that had not happened for millions of years. President Helen Carter read the message with Kevin Ross and Marcus Webb standing beside her. Vorthik stated that the Council fleet had received orders to hold position and not engage Earth's defenses. This was temporary, but it meant humanity had bought time. The question was what to do with that time. A new voice joined the communication channel within the hour. The transmission identified itself as Keeper Shaoran of the Eternal Watchers. Her species was one of the oldest in the Council, and her words carried weight that even the architects had to respect. She requested permission to speak directly with Earth's leaders. Helen Carter accepted immediately. The conversation that followed was broadcast to every nation on Earth. Shaoran's voice was ancient, tired, but also curious. She said that humanity's choice had forced the Council to confront questions they had been avoiding for epochs. The Keeper explained that not all Council species agreed with the architects about containing humanity. Several ancient civilizations remembered their own origins when they too had been young and rapidly changing. They remembered that growth required risk, and that evolution demanded uncertainty. These species had grown uncomfortable with the rigid stability the Council had imposed on the galaxy. Shaoran admitted, something that shocked everyone listening. The galaxy had been stagnant for millions of years. No major innovations had occurred. No new ideas had emerged. The ancient species had achieved stability, but at the cost of progress. They had stopped evolving, and some had begun to wonder if that made them already dead. Humanity represented something the galaxy had not seen in living memory. A species that changed fast enough that individual beings could witness their own evolution. A civilization that treated transformation as normal rather than terrifying. The architects saw this as chaos, but others saw it as vitality. The Keeper proposed something unprecedented. Instead of containment or destruction, the Council would establish open contact with humanity. Both sides would share knowledge and perspectives. The ancient species would learn how to embrace change again. Humanity would learn from civilizations that had survived for millions of years. Together they would explore what galactic civilization could become. Ambassador. Vorthik interrupted the transmission immediately. His objection was clear and angry. The architects could not accept this proposal. Humanity was too dangerous and too unpredictable. Allowing them freedom would destabilize everything the Council had built. The risk was unacceptable. Shaoran responded with patience that came from living for millions of years. She pointed out that the architects had already lost this argument. Humanity had launched 70 colony ships in 70 different directions. The Council fleet could not track them all, even if they destroyed Earth. Some humans would survive and spread. The choice was no longer between controlling humanity or eliminating them. The choice was between making humanity an ally or an eternal enemy. If the Council attacked Earth, then every surviving human would dedicate themselves to resisting Council authority. That resistance would last for generations and grow more sophisticated as humans adapted to the threat. Victoria Hayes listened to the transmission from orbit aboard her colony ship. The vessel was already 3 days' travel from Earth and accelerating. Around her, 5,000 people slept in cryogenic chambers, dreaming of worlds they might never see. She had been prepared to lead them into exile, but now something else might be possible. Jake Morrison stood in the command center on Earth, listening to the debate between ancient aliens about humanity's fate. Lisa Hamilton stood beside him, working through the implications. If the Council split over this question, then humanity had achieved something remarkable. They had forced beings who thought in terms of epochs to make a decision in days. Marcus Webb understood what was happening better than most. Evolution was not just biological, but social and cultural. The Eternal Council had evolved a stable system that worked for millions of years, but stability always came with costs. The ancient species had paid for their stability by giving up the ability to handle rapid change. Now humanity was forcing change upon them whether they wanted it or not. The Council could fight against that change and exhaust themselves trying to contain something that could not be contained, or they could adapt to the new reality and potentially benefit from it. Either way, they had to choose quickly because humans would not wait millions of years for an answer. The debate continued for 3 more days. Transmissions went back and forth between Earth and the Council fleet. Different species voiced their opinions and argued their positions. Some sided with the architects and demanded humanity be contained. Others agreed with Shauron that the time for such rigid control had passed. Brandon Cole kept the defense fleet on high alert during those 3 days. His ships surrounded Earth ready to fight if the Council decided to attack. He knew his fleet would not last long against ancient alien technology, but he was prepared to make the battle costly enough that the Council would remember it. President Carter barely slept during the debate. She spent her time speaking with world leaders and preparing humanity for whatever came next. If the Council chose war, then Earth would fight. If they chose peace, then humanity would need to figure out how to coexist with civilizations millions of years older and vastly more powerful. The breakthrough came on the 4th day. Keeper Shauron announced that the Eternal Council had reached a decision. It was not unanimous, and some species had withdrawn from the Council in protest. The architects and their closest allies refused to accept the outcome and promised to watch humanity carefully for signs of the catastrophe they predicted. But the majority of Council species had voted to accept Shauron's proposal. Humanity would not be contained or controlled. Instead, both sides would establish formal diplomatic relations. The ancient species would share some of their knowledge carefully and gradually. Humanity would share their perspective on adaptation and rapid change. Together, they would see what could be learned. The decision came with conditions. Humanity would agree not to expand aggressively into space controlled by Council species. The colony ships already launched would be allowed to settle unclaimed worlds, but new colonies would require negotiation. Human military vessels would be restricted from entering certain regions until trust could be established. In return, the Council would provide humanity with access to their database of surveyed worlds. Humans could choose from thousands of planets suitable for colonization. The ancient species would also share basic information about galactic navigation and the location of dangerous phenomena that human ships should avoid. President Carter accepted the terms immediately. They were not perfect, but they gave humanity what mattered most: the right to grow and change and spread across the stars without permission or supervision. Earth would not be free of all restrictions, but neither would it be a cage, Ambassador. Vorthik delivered one final warning before withdrawing. The architects believed humanity would eventually prove them right. Rapid change would lead to chaos and destruction. When that happened, the Council would remember that they had been warned. Until then, the architects would watch and wait. Jake Morrison was assigned as humanity's first official liaison to the Eternal Council. He would travel to a neutral station where representatives from dozens of ancient species would gather. Lisa Hamilton would accompany him, along with scientists and diplomats. From every nation on Earth, their job was to build bridges between humanity and civilizations that had nothing in common, except now sharing the same galaxy. Victoria Hayes received orders to continue her mission. The colony ship would travel to one of the worlds identified in the Council database as suitable for human settlement. She would establish humanity's first extrasolar colony and begin the process of adapting to an alien environment. Dozens of other colony ships received similar orders. Scattering humanity across the galaxy, Kevin, Ross stood down the defense fleet and began the process of transitioning. From military alert to peacetime operations, the ships that had been prepared to fight for Earth's survival would now escort colony vessels and protect human interests as they expanded into space. The war everyone feared had been avoided, but vigilance was still necessary, Claire. Mendoza published her analysis of what humanity had achieved. She explained that humans had survived first, Contact not through superior weapons or technology, but through the same trait that had always ensured human survival, adaptability, humanity, had adapted to the reality of ancient aliens faster than those aliens could adapt to the reality of humanity. Marcus Webb gave lectures about the implications of what had happened. He said that humanity had become a catalyst for change in a galaxy that had forgotten how to change. The ancient species would either learn to adapt again, or they would eventually go extinct like the civilizations before them. Either way, humanity would continue evolving and spreading because that was what humans did. President Carter addressed the world one final time about the crisis. She said that humanity had faced the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy and had not blinked. Earth had chosen freedom over safety and had made that choice work through courage and determination. The future was uncertain, but it was humanity's future to shape. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station and looked out at the galaxy. Dozens of alien vessels surrounded the station, representing species that had existed since before Earth's sun was born. Some of them feared humanity. Some were curious. Some were hopeful that humans might teach them something they had forgotten. He thought about the colony ships spreading out across the stars, each one carrying thousands of humans who would wake up on worlds no person had ever seen. Those colonists would adapt to their new homes, and within generations, they would be